Heyo people! I normally only talk about video games. Specifically, I usually only talk about Aura Kingdom. As a result, you probably don't know a lot about me personally, except that I like tier, lattes, and I work a lot. So today I thought I'd try my hand on an opinion piece about something that's more personally interesting to me, and that is a problem in Aura Kingdom. You can read the title, you already know what's coming. I have a big personal interest in translations, and in Aura Kingdom, the translation is a problem. This is a little out of my normal scope, so I get it if you're not interested. Catch you next time when I'm back to normal. This video is going to touch on a couple of different media properties, and AK is only one of them, though I assure you it is the main one. If you've read my channel description, you might have seen my claim that I understand some Japanese. I don't want to oversell myself here, but I do read some manga and light novels in the original language. I import games and I understand them. I took both regular and business Japanese language classes in university, as well as passed the lowest level of the JLPT, though that was a long time back. For my final project at university, I translated ghost stories from Japanese to English and wrote about and discussed the localization choices with my professor. Sadly, since then, my work career went completely away from anything requiring language skills, but I love playing games with Japanese audio and English subtitles to compare the choices in phrasing and localization. I mean, I also love playing games in full Japanese, script and audio, just to keep my eyes and ears sharp, but in general I usually stick with English subs and Japanese dub. I think there's something really interesting about seeing the differences in the way the same script can be presented or changed in different languages. For example, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was extremely heavily localized, and I think that the English script was actually much more lively and better suited to the setting. Of course, the original server for Aura Kingdom is not from Japan, it's from Taiwan. While this means I'm in the same boat as most players when it comes to not understanding the original language, none of us need to know there's a problem. Aura Kingdom has a story, sure, but it's not exactly winning any prizes for storytelling, and the issues with consistency and localization have been present for a long time, though it was better at the start of the game publication with Area. Can I start with my personal oldest gripe? And honestly, this isn't even about translation choices, this is even worse. In the Siege of the Aqua Dragon Queen, all the story pop-ups in the middle of the screen show just reserved for the Aqua Dragon King instance. Every one of them. And what makes this so frustrating is that this is supposed to be where we were introduced to Vaughn, also known as Olgus, which is a whole other issue on its own, but it's hard to follow what's going on. He's still involved with the story to this day, and we never got a proper introduction. So, when I was working with Gamigo as a game sage, I actually got them to send me the original language text and worked with GS Goddess and Google Translate and our English skills to submit a proper translation to the internal bug tracker to get it fixed. And then I deleted the text file I was working with on my desktop and was happy that there might finally be a long-awaited correction. Sadly, various things happened behind the scenes. I'll just say that the bug tracker had a bug and our work was lost. It's depressing, and I know it will never be fixed now. And honestly, that's the least of the problems with the translations. I know if we're being honest, no one is really playing Aura Kingdom for the story. What's actually important is understanding gear. Stuff like whether your damage percent is detail isn't always clear. Lightning damage is also called Holy Flash in some places. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether something is elemental skill damage or damage versus elemental targets, which is a pretty big difference. And then you have Pogen. What is Pogen? It's armor piercing. How? Beats me. Other things, like the names of NPCs, are also sometimes unclear, which I already mentioned earlier with the Vaughn versus Olgus, or if they're feeling a little spicy, sometimes it's Argus, just to overlap with the boss in the Triatio Highlands dungeon. And you get the same issue with the dungeon or zone names sometimes, like how Jungle of Waterfalls refers to Tanglevine Cascades, and at least that one's easy to suss out. By the time you get to the latest maps, sometimes the same NPC on the same map has a different name. Nim has a lot of names too. He even gets called Eleanor. What about Savior or Xavier? This sucks. It doesn't affect the things I enjoy about the game on a daily basis, but it definitely detracts from the experience of players. I wish it was better, and I want it to be better. But I also get it. Aura Kingdom is not operating on a massive budget, so I suspect that the story translation is being handled by people who are not translation specialists. They're probably in charge of a lot of things, and translation is just an extra part on top. 'Cause, as bad as it is on our English server, I understand that the other language servers have even more issues, and I can't even get into that as it's not something I'm qualified to evaluate. Anyway, let's talk about machine translation a bit, because I suspect that's the main method being used. An example we recently came across in the Discord seems to corroborate this. How Holy See is how machine translation translates church. I already talked about my process for handling the translation of the text in Siege, so you know I have at least some hands-on experience with processing and editing machine translation beyond just accepting the Google result when you paste something in. And that reminds me of something that happened earlier this year, 2024. There was a kerfuffle about a translation of a certain manga, specifically that the official simulpub was changing over to a machine-based translation with English editors. It was a pretty hot topic at the time, at least in places where I lurk, and I watched a couple videos about it where people were extrapolating a lot from the headlines. I'm being vague because I don't want to rehash the discourse nor argue about this particular instant anymore. But it was a flashpoint for a lot of people, so I still wanted to mention it. But I think that with how incendiary it got, it really sucked as far as discourse goes. I write stories, and very occasionally share them. And, of course, I'm sure it's something I'll never have to worry about, but it would be really depressing if someone were to translate it to another language, insert things that weren't in the story at all, and represent it as if it were my ideas. But, at the same time, the way I write is necessarily connected to the language I know, and the culture I exist in, and if there are idioms or metaphors that have comparable options in the new language, I would never complain about changing phrasing or words so that it flows more naturally in the new language to give new readers a comfortable reading experience. As a solid example, I've read plenty of light novels in present tense in Japanese, but present tense prose for novels in English is a very stylistic choice and odd to read when not handled well. Thus, usually, when translated, these are changed to past tense, which is much more comfortable and readable. Anyway, some of the takes I heard from people covering that simulpub situation in videos I watched were quite vindictive towards localizers as a whole, as if the process of translation and localization are completely separate, where a translation is accurate and a localization is made up. Of course, I agree that some bad choices were made in the examples people were giving at the time, but there are better localizers and worse localizers, just as there are better and worse translation processes. The vibe I got was that people thought localizers messed up, and now they're in the finding out stage. I hate that. Again, even if I agree that mistakes were made, the idea that the solution is to fire everybody that does localization and replace them with machine translation or AI translation sucks. I think we aren't at the point where a machine translation is going to work well enough for story-driven properties without the hands of an editor who is familiar with both languages, and the role of a good localizer is to give the reader or viewer the same experience in the new language, even if that means changing some things. There's a lot involved there. There's a lot of individual choices for each specific work. For example, let's say you're translating a show for children from Japanese to English, where one of the main characters pulls out a certain food item that is very common in Japan, but not so common in English-speaking North America, where your version of the show will be airing. Add to that, the show is not set in Japan at all, and it's the 1990s. Would you really have that much beef to pick with someone who decided to call the treat the character was excited to eat jelly donuts over rice balls? I think it was a valid choice at the time. But I can see why one might argue that they would prefer to be more true to the original to open up chances to explore other cultures, in this case, food. But I'm not going to say I would ever want every word to be one-to-one either. There's so much nuance involved. I already said I adore the localization of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and it was changed significantly from the original script. Like, seriously, there has to be someone who has done a deep dive into the absolute love and life the English localizers gave the English script, right? I haven't looked for someone covering it because I'm still just here basking in its joy. It was so well done. Did you know Sparks as a swear is completely unique to the English script? They put so much thought into how the world would affect the words the characters would use. It was a joy to read. Because, I was listening to the much more, let's say, vanilla Japanese audio. Machine translation isn't going to do that. Mind you, most translation doesn't. This is just my opinion, of course, and reasonable minds can differ, so I don't expect that everyone will think the same. But I still think the English translation of the script was better than the original Japanese for Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and no one will change my mind. Anyway, let's bring it back to Aura Kingdom for my conclusions. Maybe this seems contradictory after what I've been saying up till now, but I think it's fine if they're using machine translation. What we really need is the hands of an editor. Don't get me wrong, I really wish it was all perfectly translated by someone with the skills and enthusiasm to give us the best possible experience with the story, no matter how imperfect that story might be, because the people who wrote the words deserve that much. However, I'm pragmatic, so I accept that won't happen. But let's start with that story, which is, arguably for Aura Kingdom, the least important part of the translation as far as actually playing the game goes. I've already mentioned what the main issues are with the translation. Primarily, consistency. But like I said, no one is playing Aura Kingdom for the cohesive story experience. Take it from me, who once won a contest with Gamigo by writing a novelization of the first 2 maps, which got me this neat set of cards. The story is ironically nothing to write about. I mean, even if you can say the story is relatively coherent up to Awakening as it was translated in the before times, with the narrative about how we're trying to get rid of our Eidolon due to what we see Brian go through, but eventually come to accept them and work with their powers to take our place in the narrative of the world, there's an immediate issue where the kiddos are involved. Because both of them have to return to Port Scandia and talk to a complete stranger the same way that envoys that start in Port Scandia do. We had mentors on the Starcaller and Nunchuck maps. This could have been done differently. But, again, I don't think anyone feels strongly enough about the story to say we need a deft hand to go over all the new maps to lovingly rewrite every line. Chances are, everyone hit skip on the dialogue anyway. But I still want the names to be consistent, for NPCs and places. As a main example, make Von across every map and dungeon. Same goes for bosses and dungeons and dungeon names. Silent Ancient Castle and Dawn Passage have different names for the S25 Otherworld variants, both in terms of dungeon names and the bosses' names. I think this is important, because I believe most players will call things by their so-called original names where they exist, which can be confusing for newer players, and for NPCs introduced in later game where the consistency is already gone, no one will bother trying to remember NPC names at all. Next, and much more importantly, we need consistency on stats. And the frustrating part on these is that when in doubt on what exactly the stats on gear are, as players, our first move is to check the original language database and feed it through machine translation. And usually it gets us a better result than the official, which is maddening. Also, and I hazard to guess this was to help with the database size or something, but a while back a whole bunch of quests and items text descriptions were truncated. Oh, and also stuff like the descriptions of skills, meaning that some of your skills may have effects cut off by the text just stopping midway through. And again, the only way we have to get the full descriptions is to head over to Google Translate on the database website. These are issues that really need to be fixed, but it's a massive task given the size of the game. I get that, but unlike the consistency issues in NPC naming, which seems like it should be easier to handle, this makes a huge difference for playability. There's even gear out there that says that it reduces your crit damage. It doesn't. But how are you supposed to know that when your eyes are literally telling you it does? This needs to be fixed. And finally, of course, if I may be so bold as to request a very personal fix, I would really like the Siege of the Aqua Dragon Queen to be translated. Please. This text box haunts my dreams. This does nothing for anyone. It just hurts my soul to see unfixed for nearly a decade. Listen, I love Aura Kingdom a lot. As an older MMO, I know it's challenging to draw in new players, so I've tried to avoid negative topics because I just honestly want people to give it a shot to see if they enjoy it, because there's so much to enjoy. But all games have problems, and the translation is not only a problem, it's a problem with something that I feel strongly about. It's not the only issue Aura Kingdom has, but Again, I'm interested in translation, so maybe it grates on me more than your average player. If you're a person who hasn't played Aura Kingdom before and are considering it, I want you to keep 2 things in mind. First, the translation issues are primarily in endgame. From level 1 to 119, you're mostly dealing with the Game Ego era translation, which was much better, though obviously not perfect. And second, if you're ever confused, we have the Discord and the database website to check things over. Come get involved in the community. And finally, if you're ex-Legend staff that has come across this video, I volunteer to assist in the translation and localization process. I don't need compensation. I'm willing to assist in making the translations more cohesive and cogent for free. If you're willing to offer, though, I can be bought with cool dude eidolons. I would love an Odin. Either way, reach out to me on Discord. My DMs are open. Anyway, thanks for taking the time to listen to me talk about translation. As someone who can barely pass for almost bilingual, I'm definitely not an expert on the topic, but it's still something I feel strongly about and may talk about more in the future. Also, we're so very close to 1,000 subscribers at time of writing. It's so surreal. I never thought that it would happen, and it's thanks to you all that it seems possible now. It would be so amazing if we could pass that number, because my best friend promised me a few years back that she would take me out for dinner when I pass 1,000, and I don't think she thought it would really happen. I could really go for some free Korean-style fried chicken soon, and that's what I have my eyes on. That's the only reason. Definitely no other reason why passing 1,000 is cool. But, as a gamer, stat number go up is definitely a big serotonin generator too. Anyway, jokes aside, for real, thank you everyone, and especially thank you for taking a chance on this weird video about something I care a lot about. Catch you next time.